Hereditary diseases in dogs also exist. Many of them suffer from conditions that are already genetically predetermined from before their birth. Unfortunately, this is something very common that happens both pure breeds and crossbreeds. It is a purely biological issue, since these evolutionary genes are scattered in the genome of each domestic canine. Fortunately, thanks to the advances of science and the respective investigations, nowadays there are several treatments to prevent and treat diseases in dogs. Thanks to them we can enjoy their company for much longer and prolong their welfare. Normally the diseases in our pet can be of hereditary origin as well as of environmental or nutritional origin. Fortunately, these hereditary pathologies do not seriously affect the life of the animal. Every day the genetic disorders are more controllable and curable. The advance of science is unstoppable, and every time there are more solutions to the affections that our pets present. When it comes to prevent the development of a genetic disease, there is a lot of advice on the matter. This type of diseases can be easily prevented, as well as to impose the effective treatment when it arises. An attentive and responsible owner will be able to handle this type of situations perfectly. These pathologies can be controlled in time, imposing the appropriate measures. Only some of these hereditary diseases in dogs are serious. But even in these cases, when even the life of the animal is at stake, there are hundreds of treatments capable of moderating and even controlling them. The lifestyle of our pet also contributes to the development of these diseases. Good nutrition and control of their health should be basic aspects in your life. Do not forget that your pet cannot take care of itself. You must take care of it if you want your company to be long and good. Hello. Welcome, my name is Alex Garcia. I am a veterinarian from the Agrarian University in Colombia. I have been providing my medical services for the Animaid Veterinary Clinic for more or less 2 years. The topics that concern us today are genetic, congenital and hereditary diseases, sometimes used interchangeably, but we are going to address a little their differences and certain pathologies, which we say group these types of pathological circumstances. First of all, we have genetic diseases. These pathologies usually have the characteristic that they are damages that are produced in the DNA, and some are of individual genetic character, or others that are of chromosome character, and some of individual type like hemophilia A or B that are damages in the factor 8 and 9 of the coagulation. Some more important like the tumor diseases or cancer. That also involve these genetic disorders at DNA level. Sometimes these types of circumstances obey or may arise depending on the type of cells, the amount of injury or cellular damage that may be present. Continuing with the classification, we have diseases of hereditary order. This type of pathologies can arise clearly in inherited order. Then they are the pathologies that we inherit or we can inherit to our generations. This type of pathologies, usually if the majority of circumstances can appear due to indiscriminate crosses. These indiscriminate crossings sometimes have to do a lot with the selection process that we have in the breeders, in which the inconvenience is that we have certain consanguinity, which in the long run, ends up generating certain type of pathologies that lead to have problems throughout the life of a patient. Then we have in that type of inherited circumstances pathologies such as diabetes that sometimes generate our patients a deficiency of insulin, which leads to a disordered metabolism. We also have some types of prognathism of the lower or upper jaw, in which we will see patients who eventually end up suffering from pathologies in nutritional or dietary issues. Following with some pathologies of hereditary order, we have acne. We usually see patients with acne, feline patients, canine patients. Usually it is a pathology that will occur throughout life, but it generates some discomfort in the owners. The casuistry is usually high. Another type of pathologies of hereditary order and also congenital, are those suffered by brachycephalics. This type of patients usually, we can have elongated palates, stenotic nostrils and eversion of the laryngeal saccules, which produces an efficiency at respiratory level, and finally as pathology is extremely important, is the hip dysplasia. It is a joint disease, more frequent in dogs of big sizes. This is generally generated by a bad congruence of the acetabular cavity with the femoral heads, which allows us to have physically active patients, but with a pathology that will accompany them all their life, which sometimes makes the treatment a little difficult in the circumstances of geriatric patients. And finally we have the pathologies of congenital order. This type of pathologies can arise from birth, can be or not of hereditary order or origin. They can also be due to extrinsic or intrinsic factors within the gestation process. They are usually processes that affect the fetuses and produce pathologies at birth. Some of the most important pathologies of this type can be spina bifida, cardiopathies, deafness usually reported in Dalmatians, and umbilical hernias that are of much casuistry in the daily clinic. Things we should know within this classification is that sometimes the same diseases can be congenital and hereditary, but not all congenital diseases are hereditary and vice versa. Also, not all diseases that are hereditary are manifested at birth, so it would not be ideal or correct to call them congenital. Not all diseases that are manifested from birth are transmitted by the parents with their offspring, so it would not be correct to call them hereditary. As a final recommendation within the selection and breeding products, it is that we make choices that avoid inbreeding, in order to avoid certain pathologies of hereditary order that can lead to congenital, and that can definitely be within the DNA, and that implies that later we will have pathological problems. There are certain breeds that, as you have heard, suffer from many pathologies either by breeding issues, selection, their genetics, and clearly that helps a lot that the congenital order ends up being involved. Among the recommendations will also be that we have to be very careful with our pregnant females, because as we realized, there are diseases that can be generated from the fetus and we are going to have it later on. These recommendations are important. Do not forget to always visit a veterinarian in the processes of breeding and selection, clearly in seasonal processes in which we can help and give the best recommendations for the future. It is also important to know that sometimes the processes of inbreeding are not so good, because they make crossings of relatives, which leads to have congenital or hereditary diseases. So we hope that the recommendations given on inbreeding issues are well used, because inappropriate crosses sometimes between siblings or relatives generate this type of congenital diseases in the future. It is important to always think about adoption and not to continue with crosses that in the long run will end up with problems that are much more difficult to face throughout the life of a patient. There are also females that can have many births throughout their lives, with that wear out so much that their genetic material will be affected. Thank you very much for joining us on this day. The recommendation is to visit us on our social networks. Know a little more of the medical staff, everything we do, and have the pleasure to serve you. Until next time.